The scent of seared flesh lingers in the Roman summer air, thick, metallic, unholy. A red-hot iron grill smolders above glowing coals, set like an altar of agony. Bound to it by chains scorched black, a man lies naked, his skin blistering, muscles spasming under the rising heat. The crowd watches, breathless, not out of pity, but perverse anticipation. Rome does not weep for the condemned. It observes, and yet the man does not scream. He turns his head, his lips cracked and bleeding, and with astonishing calm, speaks to his executioner. "You may turn me over now, this side is done." Laughter erupts, but it isn't mockery, it's disbelief, because the man on the grill is not mad. He is serene, he is St. Lawrence, and in his final moments he is not consumed by fire, but by something far more terrifying to Rome, faith that does not burn. Rome, 200, an empire at its height, but rotting beneath its marble skin. The temples are full, the streets crowded, the statues shining, but fear seeps into every stone. Christianity is growing in shadows, underground masses whispered in catacombs, symbols scratched into stone, fish not lions, bread not blood, hope not conquest. And at the center of this resistance stands Lawrence. He is not a warrior, he bears no sword, no armor gleams on his shoulders. He is a deacon, a servant, whose duty is not to fight Rome but to care for the poorest in its shadow. He feeds the hungry, shelters the sick, protects the relics of a fragile faith still hunted by the empire's wrath. When Emperor Valerian declares war on the church, not with legions but with laws, Lawrence becomes a target. Priests are executed, bishops vanish, blood runs not from battlefields but from the mouths of martyrs. Lawrence is caught, but not in hiding, in service. He is arrested, tortured, ordered to betray everything he protects. But he does not run, he does not plead, he smiles, and what follows is not just the story of a man who refused to scream, but of a soul that turned torment into transcendence. Long before flames licked his flesh, Lawrence walked in silence. He was born around 2025 AD, in the town of Huesca, nestled within the Roman province of Hispania, a region where Roman gods ruled the temples, and Christian prayers were whispered only behind closed doors. His parents, believers of the forbidden faith, raised him in the quiet defiance of early Christianity, where love was rebellion, and suffering was a rite of passage. As a boy, Lawrence was drawn not to glory, but to grace. He studied in Sassuagustia, what we now call Zaragoza, where he immersed himself in theology and Latin scripture. It was there he met a man who would change his life, Sixtus, a fellow Spaniard, older, wise, and destined for martyrdom. Their bond was not one of politics or blood, but of spirit, mentor and student, father and son. When Sixtus was called to Rome, Lawrence followed, not because he sought power, but because he believed in the church that hid beneath the empire's skin. Rome at that time was a paradox, a city of grandeur and rot. Golden statues loomed over crumbling alleys. The Senate roared with law, even as it outlawed love that did not serve the state. Christianity was illegal, not because it threatened the gods, but because it threatened the emperor's control. The Christians refused to bow to idols. They refused to kill in the name of Caesar. They refused even in chains to renounce their invisible kingdom. Sixtus became pope. Lawrence became his right hand, archdeacon of Rome. At just 30 years old, he was entrusted with the church's most precious burdens, its sacred relics, its humble coins, its scattered flock. He fed the poor with alms, not sermons. He guarded communion bread as if it were gold. He walked Rome's alleys, not as a priest cloaked in silk, but as a brother to the broken. But peace in Rome was always borrowed time. In 257, Emperor Valerian issued his first edict: all Christian clergy must perform sacrifice to the Roman gods or face exile. Some priests bent, others fled, but the church endured, beneath the catacombs, beneath the stone, beneath the fear. The next year the punishment changed, no longer exile, now death. Sixtus was found first. They caught him during an underground liturgy in the catacombs, a hidden sanctuary carved into Rome's bones. Soldiers dragged him from the altar. He did not fight, he did not speak. The blade fell quickly, but as the guards hauled Sixtus away, a voice rang out, not from the crowd but from the shadows. "Where are you going, Father, without your deacon?" It was Lawrence, pale with grief, voice shaking but unbroken. Sixtus turned, blood already staining his robes, and answered with something less than prophecy, but more than farewell. "I do not leave you, my son. I go ahead. You will follow me in 3 days." And then he was gone. 3 days. 3 days to prepare. 3 days to choose how to die. And more importantly, how to live until that moment came. The news of Sixtus's execution spread like smoke through the Christian underground. For those who still dared to gather in crypts and candlelit cellars, his death was a dagger to the heart. But for Lawrence it was a countdown. 3 days, not to escape, but to finish his work. Rome's prefect, a man swaddled in pride and suspicion, knew Lawrence by name, not for his preaching, but for his title, archdeacon, the church's treasurer, keeper of its riches. And in Rome, where altars glittered and temples were dressed in gold, the prefect believed Lawrence held a vault of untapped wealth, hidden from the emperor. Defiant in its secrecy, he summoned the deacon and made his demand: hand over the treasures of the church. Lawrence bowed, eyes low, voice calm. "Give me 3 days," he said. The prefect agreed. Arrogance makes easy prey. But Lawrence did not flee. He did not dig holes in the earth. He did not forge false documents or beg allies to smuggle him from the city. Instead, he walked the alleys and gutters. He visited the sick. He gave coins to beggars. He clothed widows with silks meant for altars. He sold sacred vessels, emptied accounts, emptied cupboards, emptied everything. By the end of the 3rd day, Rome's Christian wealth, if such a thing could be named, was gone. All that remained were people. When he returned to the prefect, Lawrence did not come alone. Behind him walked a procession of outcasts: the lame, the blind, the dying, orphans and widows, men too sick to speak, women too poor to dress in mourning. Their bodies bore the scars of neglect, ribs like bars, eyes dulled by hunger, and yet they followed him, not as beggars but as witnesses. Lawrence raised his hand and declared, "Behold, the true treasures of the church." For a moment silence, then rage. The prefect, humiliated before his guards and mocked by a man he thought already broken, ordered Lawrence arrested on the spot. But this time, no quick blade, no dignified execution, no martyrdom in shadow. He wanted pain. He wanted Lawrence to beg. He wanted to know, truly know, where the gold was hidden. But Lawrence had already given everything, and now he would give himself. The sentence was passed: death by fire. But not in the roaring blaze of spectacle. No, the Romans were artists in cruelty. They would craft a death that moved slowly, a punishment that cooked instead of burned, a lesson not just for Lawrence but for every Christian watching from behind shuttered windows. They built the instrument carefully, an iron grill, wide and cruel. Coals were gathered and stoked, not into flame but into a bed of glowing embers, hot enough to sear flesh, but slow enough to prolong the agony. The kind of fire that made the soul feel each inch of its departure. Lawrence did not flinch. When they stripped him naked and chained him down, he did not curse. He did not weep. He looked at the sky and whispered a prayer, because he had already chosen what to burn, and it was not fear. They brought him to the fire just before dusk, when the shadows of Rome stretched long across its streets, and the scent of olive smoke drifted through the air. The iron grill stood like an altar, low to the ground, glowing faintly from beneath with coals stoked not to erupt but to smolder. This was no execution. It was a performance of agony, carefully orchestrated, cruelly precise. Lawrence was stripped of his robes, his dignity, his flesh made bare before the empire that had stripped so many others of their lives in silence. But he did not resist. He lay himself down as if entering a grave already dug. They chained him at the wrists and ankles, locking his body against the scorching bars. The metal hissed, and the first scent of burning skin rose into the Roman dusk. The crowd gathered slowly. Some came for spectacle, others drawn by whispers. Christians, hidden in plain sight, hearts pounding in horror and reverence. The prefect stood at a distance, watching, waiting, expecting screams, but Lawrence offered none, only his breathing, steady, shallow, marked time. As the heat rose and the metal seared deeper, witnesses claimed his face did not twist in pain. It softened. Some said he smiled, others claimed he sang, not loudly, but under his breath, the way a priest recites Mass in the catacombs. Whether he spoke Latin prayers or simply the name of Christ over and over, no one could say. But what they saw was peace. The crowd's mood shifted. They had come for the cracking of bones, the smell of terror, but they found instead a man who would not die the way Rome expected. The flames licked his back, peeled his skin like bark, and still he endured. The flesh should have sizzled with rot, yet some swore a sweet aroma filled the air, not of decay, but of incense. And then, the moment that would echo across centuries. Lawrence lifted his head slightly, turned his face toward his executioner, and with a voice hoarse but clear, he said, "You may turn me over now. This side is done." Some laughed. Others gasped. Even the guards, hardened by years of bloodshed, paused. It was not defiance. It was humor, holy and terrifying, a joke told from within the furnace, a final human rebellion against the machinery of death. They turned him. More heat, more burning, more silence, and yet in that silence something shifted. Rome did not triumph that night, because fire had touched his body, but could not consume his spirit. Some say Roman senators present at the execution wept, others fell to their knees, or fled in shame. A few, it is said, converted on the spot, not to Lawrence's faith but to the mystery that a man could meet death like that, and still be whole. When at last the flesh gave way and breath ceased, they thought it was over. But it had only just begun. They tried to erase him. They dragged his body from the iron grill, now blackened and bent, and hoped his silence would linger only as smoke in the wind. No monument, no ceremony, just another nameless rebel consumed by Rome's fire. But saints do not disappear. They echo in footsteps, in prayers, in stones that will not crumble. The Christians came in darkness, quiet as breath. They retrieved what remained of Lawrence's body and buried it along the Via Tiburtina, where the dirt still remembers. They laid him not with fanfare, but with reverence, the kind reserved for those whose flesh had failed but whose faith had not. They did not mark the grave with banners. They did not boast. They wept, and they waited. Decades passed. Rome changed as it always did. Emperors died, laws shifted, and eventually so did power. In the early 4th century, Emperor Constantine, the ruler who would one day legalize Christianity, built a basilica over Lawrence's tomb, San Lorenzo fuori le mura, St. Lawrence outside the walls. It still stands, a sanctuary built where flames once danced, but the fire had spread. His story traveled farther than Rome ever did, carried in whispers from catacomb to chapel, from martyr list to legend. In Spain, the land of his birth, the people built a monument not only of stone but of shape, El Escorial, a massive monastery constructed in the form of a grill, not to mourn his death, but to honor the way he met it. Painters like Fra Angelico and Rubens captured his final moments in oil and gold leaf, not with screams or agony, but with light, a man glowing from within, not a victim but a vessel. Writers called him the joyful martyr, a phrase that should not exist and yet somehow, in his case, did. Even theologians struggled to explain it. St. Augustine, centuries later, could not comprehend the calm that poured from Lawrence's soul on the grill. His love for Christ burned so intensely, Augustine wrote, that he did not feel the flames. Whether metaphor or miracle, the mystery endured. His feast day was fixed to the calendar, August 10th, and every year since, the heavens mark it with fire. Meteors streak across the sky, known as the tears of St. Lawrence. Some say the stars themselves weep for him. Others believe they do not weep at all, but shimmer in joy, reflecting the courage of a man who smiled as the world turned to ash. In time, Lawrence became more than a martyr. He became a symbol of defiance through love, of victory through surrender, of a faith that could not be burned away. Rome had built temples to gods of stone, but Lawrence had become a flame that would not die. What kind of man laughs on a grill? Not a fool, not a madman, not a zealot drunk on suffering, but someone who has already surrendered everything, and found in that surrender a power greater than Rome. St. Lawrence was not fearless. He bled like any man. His skin burned, his breath faltered. But what set him apart was not his pain, it was his peace. The world stripped him bare, and still he gave more. The state demanded gold, and he offered the poor. The flames demanded screams, and he offered a joke. He faced the fire not as an enemy, but as a threshold, a door through which he could pass, not alone but with dignity intact, and something more dangerous than defiance, joy. His death did not echo because of spectacle, it echoed because of meaning. He transformed the grill, an instrument of torture, into a pulpit, a final sermon not preached with words, but with flesh, spirit, and stillness. To this day his story is whispered wherever injustice tries to silence the faithful, wherever cruelty wears the mask of power, wherever someone stands before death and dares to smile. Because Lawrence taught us this: the body may burn, but the soul, if lit with love, cannot be extinguished. And every August, when stars streak across the night sky, we are reminded, some flames purify, some pain illuminates, and some names will never turn to ash.